The rain had been falling for hours, blanketing the city in a cold, gray stillness. Wind howled between buildings, and puddles formed on the sidewalks like miniature lakes. The upscale restaurant on the corner of the avenue remained untouched by the storm's chaos. Warm lights glowing through its glass windows, jazz music softly echoing inside, and the clinking of silverware marking the rhythm of refined indulgence. Businessmen in sharp suits, women in tailored dresses, and socialites with polished nails and expensive watches filled the tables. It was a world designed to impress, a place where appearances meant everything. And then, the door creaked open. Heads turned. Conversations paused for just a second. A man stood in the doorway, dripping from head to toe. His coat was torn at the sleeves, his jeans stained and frayed. His boots were cracked and muddy, and his face, partially hidden by a thick, scruffy beard, looked weathered from years of hardship. His eyes, however, those told a different story. Calm, observant, and intelligent. But in a place where clothes spoke louder than eyes, no one noticed that detail. A young waiter, no older than 25, spotted the figure and felt an instinctive smirk tug at the corners of his mouth. His name was Tyler, eager, ambitious, and always trying to win approval from his manager. He had memorized the rules of customer service by heart, but he had also picked up an unspoken one. People who don't look rich don't belong here. And this man, drenched and shabby, looked like someone who had wandered in by mistake, or worse, someone looking for handouts. Tyler strutted across the marble floor, flashing a rehearsed smile to nearby customers as he made his way to the door. But the smile disappeared as he approached the man, replaced with thinly veiled disgust. "Sir," he began, loud enough for nearby diners to hear, "this isn't the kind of place where you can just walk in off the street. We have standards here." The man said nothing at first. He simply looked around the room as if taking in the layout, the energy, the architecture. He didn't flinch at the waiter's tone. Instead, he met Tyler's eyes and said softly, "I'd like a table, just for one." Tyler blinked, taken aback by the request. He chuckled, then laughed, louder this time, as if the idea of this soaked and scruffy stranger requesting a table was the best joke he'd heard all day. "You want a table?" he repeated, almost theatrically, inviting the attention of the nearby diners. "Sir, unless you're hiding a tuxedo under that trench coat and a platinum card in your sock, I suggest you try somewhere more in your range." Laughter rippled from a nearby table, and a few phones were subtly raised, recording snippets of what some assumed was a social prank or a TikTok stunt. A woman whispered to her partner, "Is he serious?" "He looks like he hasn't eaten in days," to which the man replied, "Probably hasn't." But the man didn't leave. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply took one step forward, brushing off a few drops of rain from his sleeve, and calmly said again, "A table. For one." No trace of shame, no trace of anger, just quiet dignity. Tyler's smile faltered. This wasn't going according to script. Usually people like this backed down, embarrassed, defeated. But something about this man's calm composure unnerved him. The way he stood, not as a beggar, but as someone used to being heard. Still, Tyler doubled down. "Look, I don't want to make a scene," he said, clearly already making one. "You're wet. You're not dressed for this place, and frankly, our guests don't want to be disturbed." From across the room, the restaurant manager, a man named Gregory, who had worked in hospitality for 2 decades, noticed the tension. He'd trained Tyler himself, taught him everything about etiquette, presentation, and customer interaction. But he also knew the danger of judging too quickly. He began walking over, already sensing that this situation was more than it appeared. Tyler, spotting Gregory, quickly leaned in and said, "Don't worry, I've got it handled. Just some guy trying to sneak in for warmth." But the manager wasn't so sure. Something about the man's eyes caught his attention. The way he scanned the room, the calm confidence in his stance, the subtle way he avoided confrontation yet didn't retreat. Gregory addressed him directly. "Sir, do you have a reservation?" The man nodded once. "Under the name John Reynolds." The name didn't immediately click. Tyler crossed his arms smugly, expecting the manager to escort the man out. But Gregory frowned. The name sounded familiar. He pulled out the reservation tablet and tapped a few keys. Within seconds, the screen displayed not just a reservation, but a flagged VIP guest notification. A rare alert reserved for highly prestigious visitors. Gregory's face changed. His back straightened and his voice softened. "Mr. Reynolds, welcome. I apologize for the misunderstanding. Please, allow me to personally show you to your table." A hush fell over the surrounding tables. Tyler's smirk evaporated, replaced by disbelief. John Reynolds? The tech mogul who had built a billion-dollar company from nothing? The same man featured on magazine covers and economic forums? The man who looked at this moment like he'd spent the night on a park bench? John gave a polite nod and followed Gregory. As he passed the other guests, many looked away, ashamed, embarrassed. Phones were slowly lowered. Conversations stopped. Tyler remained frozen in place, heart pounding. He had just laughed at a man who could have bought the entire restaurant, and probably wouldn't have noticed the expense. But more than the money, it was the character that stunned everyone. John hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't flexed his power. He had simply asked, calmly, respectfully, for what he knew he had a right to. And in doing so, he exposed the arrogance of the room without saying a single harsh word. The mockery had begun with rain, rags, and ridicule. But it ended with silence, the kind of silence that forces people to reflect, and maybe, just maybe, change. The moment the name John Reynolds appeared on the tablet screen, everything changed. The once casual posture of the manager snapped into attention, like a soldier recognizing a general. The ambient murmur of the restaurant faded beneath the weight of recognition. For Gregory, the restaurant manager, this was no ordinary guest. John Reynolds wasn't just wealthy. He was a legend, a self-made billionaire. Reynolds was known around the globe for revolutionizing clean tech and investing in humanitarian causes. His face had graced the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Time. He wasn't just rich. He was influential, mysterious, and known for his aversion to publicity. He rarely made public appearances, and even more rarely did he dine out without booking an entire venue in advance. Yet here he was, standing quietly, rain-soaked and dressed in clothing most would associate with someone who had fallen through society's cracks. Gregory glanced at the tablet again to make sure it wasn't a mistake. The reservation was real. VIP status confirmed. A small note was even added. Traveling low profile. No publicity. Treat discreetly. That explained the look, the worn clothes, the unassuming demeanor. John Reynolds wasn't in disguise. This was his way. He believed in living among people, understanding them, even walking in their shoes, sometimes quite literally. Gregory had read about Reynolds's social experiments, where he would go unnoticed in public spaces, even sleeping in shelters to better understand homelessness. Few believed it. Now Gregory was witnessing it firsthand. He turned to the stunned Tyler, whose expression had frozen somewhere between shock and regret. "Tyler," Gregory said with quiet firmness, "you owe Mr. Reynolds an apology." Tyler's mouth opened, but no words came out. A lump formed in his throat. He had mocked a billionaire. No, he had dismissed, laughed at, and humiliated a man who had the power to ruin his career with a single phone call. Worse yet, he had done it because he judged a man's worth by his clothes, forgetting the very core of hospitality: respect. John Reynolds, however, didn't seem interested in punishment. As Gregory pulled out a plush velvet chair at one of the private corner tables, usually reserved for celebrities or diplomats, Reynolds paused. He turned slightly and looked at Tyler, The restaurant had gone quiet. Diners watched with hushed anticipation. Was he going to yell? Shame him? Sue the restaurant? But Reynolds simply said, "Don't worry. You're not the first to misjudge me. You won't be the last." His tone was not angry, not cold, just human. Then, with a small smile, he added, "It's a valuable lesson, though. One you shouldn't forget." Gregory stepped in, attempting to ease the moment. "Mr. Reynolds, please accept our deepest apologies. We'll be covering your meal today, of course." Reynolds raised a hand politely. "That won't be necessary. I always pay for my meals. It's not about the food. It's about how people treat each other." By now, word had spread throughout the restaurant. The same guests who had whispered about the homeless man were now whispering about the billionaire. People glanced toward him, awkwardly trying to reconcile the image of a rain-soaked man with the tycoon whose companies powered their phones, vehicles, and even their homes.
A woman who had earlier scoffed under her breath now looked visibly uncomfortable, stirring her drink in silence. An executive near the bar put away his phone and stared into space, his conscience tapping at the corners of his thoughts. A young couple who had filmed the encounter deleted the video from their phones, guilt creeping into their faces. Meanwhile, Tyler stood by, hands clenched, his eyes wide. His mind raced. What had I just done? He replayed every word, every smirk, every moment of arrogance. And now, standing inches away from one of the world's most powerful men, he felt smaller than ever, not because Reynolds made him feel that way, but because of his own actions. To his credit, Tyler took a breath, stepped forward, and said with a trembling voice, "Mr. Reynolds, I'm truly sorry. I was rude, disrespectful, and wrong. I judged you based on how you looked, and I forgot what my job really is. I hope you can forgive me." Reynolds studied him for a moment, not with anger, not with disdain, but with the quiet gaze of someone who had once been in similar shoes. After all, Reynolds had grown up poor. He knew what it was like to be invisible, to be dismissed. And perhaps that's why he was here today, not to test others, but to remind them. "I forgive you," Reynolds said simply. "But remember this moment. One day, someone might come through that same door looking like they have nothing. And you'll have the chance to treat them with the dignity they deserve before you learn who they really are." Tyler nodded, grateful and ashamed in equal measure. Gregory quickly moved to ensure Reynolds had everything he needed: a dry towel, a change of shirt from their backroom stock, and his favorite tea blend, which the restaurant happened to carry for VIP guests. As Reynolds sat at his table, opening a laptop to catch up on emails, the restaurant returned to its rhythm. But the energy had shifted. Staff moved with more mindfulness. Conversations resumed, but with softer tones. And Tyler, once so eager to impress through arrogance, now watched and learned, humbled. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean. Inside, a different kind of cleansing had just taken place, the kind that doesn't come from soap or polish, but from self-awareness and the courage to grow. The clatter of silverware and low hum of conversation resumed, but something unspoken hung in the air, a hush that settled not from fear or scandal, but from reflection. The kind of silence that made people avoid each other's eyes, not out of shame, but self-awareness. John Reynolds sat quietly at his table, steam rising from his freshly poured tea, his laptop open but untouched. Around him, the restaurant had become a study in discomfort. No one dared to approach, yet nearly everyone stared. Tyler stood by the service station, pretending to reorganize the cutlery trays, but his eyes kept drifting toward Reynolds. The encounter had shaken him to the core, not because of the man's wealth, that revelation had only been the trigger, but because it laid bare a truth he didn't want to face. He had become the very thing he once despised. He had mocked someone vulnerable, not realizing he was speaking to a man who had once walked those very streets with empty pockets and silent dreams. The staff moved differently now. They carried plates with more care, spoke to each other with more humility. Even the head chef, who rarely stepped out of his kitchen sanctuary, came to glance at the mysterious figure who had silently shifted the energy of the entire place. Reynolds, for his part, said nothing more. He didn't gloat, didn't demand attention. His power was quiet, a mirror that forced others to see themselves. A group of businessmen at the far end of the room whispered intensely. One of them, a venture capitalist, had met Reynolds years ago at a tech summit in Zurich. He remembered the man's brilliance but also his humility, how he wore off-the-rack suits and stayed in modest hotels even after his IPO. "He lives simply," the VC murmured to his colleague. "Says wealth should be used, not worn." At a nearby table, an older woman set down her wine glass and said aloud, "I wonder how many people I've ignored today because they didn't fit my idea of worth." Her husband looked down, unable to respond. Back at the front, Gregory approached Tyler once more, this time with less reprimand and more concern. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Tyler nodded, then shook his head. "I don't know. I keep thinking, if he hadn't said his name, I'd have thrown him out. And I wouldn't have lost a moment of sleep over it." Gregory placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all make mistakes, Tyler. But it's what you do with the silence afterward that matters. That's when you learn." That silence now stretched across the restaurant. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the presence of something heavier. Realization, regret, and reckoning. A waitress, no older than Tyler, quietly filled Reynolds' water glass and whispered, "Thank you for not making a scene." Reynolds looked up, kindness in his eyes. Sometimes silence is the loudest message. And indeed it was. A group of influencers who had been filming their lunch opted not to upload the footage of the incident, despite knowing it would go viral. "I think this one's for real life," one of them said softly, for once realizing that not everything needed to be turned into content. The encounter had not ended in a lawsuit or a shouting match. It had ended in a lesson, raw, human, and deeply unsettling. As Reynolds typed on his laptop, a small boy from a family dining 2 tables away walked over timidly. "Excuse me, sir," he said, holding out a crayon drawing. "Are you the man who helps people?" John looked up, smiled, and took the drawing. "I try to be," he replied gently. The boy beamed and ran back to his parents. Around them, adults sat in silence, watching, learning. Not from a speech, not from a lecture, but from an example. Reynolds finished his tea and stood up. Gregory moved swiftly to assist, offering an umbrella and coat, but Reynolds declined. "Thank you," he said, "but I'll walk. Rain's good for the soul." As he passed Tyler, he paused one last time. Not to humiliate, not to threaten, but to offer clarity. "Judging others doesn't reveal who they are," Reynolds said, his voice low. "It reveals who you are." Tyler's eyes welled with tears. "I'll remember that." "I know you will," Reynolds said, and with that, he walked into the storm again. The man everyone had tried to forget when he looked like a nobody, and now the man no one would ever forget. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and in that silence, the restaurant changed. Not its decor, not its menu, but its people. The confrontation wasn't loud. It didn't come with outrage. It came in silence, the kind that lingers long after the sound is gone, forcing hearts to listen. The restaurant didn't return to normal. It evolved. From the moment the door closed behind John Reynolds, the atmosphere shifted into something deeper, almost sacred. It was as if everyone who had witnessed the encounter, the mockery, the revelation, the silence, had been part of a collective awakening. But for one person in particular, the transformation wasn't just emotional. It was existential. Tyler's shift had only just begun. For years, Tyler had viewed his job through a single lens: serve the rich, impress the influential, keep climbing. His charm was polished, his mannerisms rehearsed. Every smile was a tool, every interaction a means to an end. He never thought of his uniform as a symbol of service. He wore it like armor in a battlefield of tips, egos, and status. But now, stripped of pride and drenched in guilt, Tyler began to feel the uniform in a different way, like a second chance. He didn't return to his usual rotation. Instead, he quietly approached the kitchen, where the dishwashers and prep cooks were working tirelessly, far from the glamour of the front house. He offered to help. At first, they blinked in surprise. This was the same waiter who rarely ventured past the swinging double doors unless it benefited him. But now he scrubbed plates, carried heavy crates, and listened, really listened, to their stories. During a short break, Rosa, a soft-spoken dishwasher who had worked there for 7 years without ever being asked about her life, finally opened up. "My husband," she said hesitantly. "He used to sleep on the street before he got his first job. I never told anyone. Too ashamed." Tyler didn't interrupt. He just nodded, wiping his hands on a towel. "You don't have to be," he said softly. "I was ashamed today. And I had everything." Word of Tyler's transformation spread through the staff like warmth through cold bones. He began greeting everyone, not just customers, and with eye contact. He offered water to the valet attendants on hot days. He helped a new waitress memorize the specials. It wasn't about image anymore. It was about respect, and people felt it. A few days later, a regular customer, Mr. Ellison, a grumpy old financier known for his impossible standards, came in for lunch. Tyler approached him differently this time. Instead of the usual transactional charm, he said, "Good afternoon, sir. I hope today's been kind to you." The man raised an eyebrow. "That's new." Tyler simply smiled and replied, "So is my perspective." In a surprising turn, Mr. Ellison not only left a generous tip, but also scribbled a note on the receipt. "You're different. Keep going." That night, as the restaurant emptied, Gregory called Tyler into his office. The room was dimly lit, with ledgers open and staff schedules scattered. But his tone was sincere.
"I've seen a lot of staff come and go," Gregory said, folding his hands. "Some grow bitter, some become slick, and some, very few, actually grow." Tyler swallowed, unsure what to say. "You messed up that day," Gregory continued, "but you've owned it. That matters more than pretending it never happened. I see you making amends, not just to John Reynolds, but to yourself." Tyler looked down. I forgot what it meant to serve people. Not just the ones in suits, but all people." Gregory nodded. "Then you're starting to understand." In the weeks that followed, Tyler's redemption deepened. He started volunteering once a week at a nearby shelter. Not out of guilt, not anymore, but out of empathy. He remembered what John Reynolds had said. Judging others doesn't reveal who they are, it reveals who you are. Those words had carved themselves into his memory like scripture. One night, while serving soup at the shelter, Tyler met a man named Caleb, mid-40s, bright eyes, rough exterior. They got to talking. Caleb had been a contractor who lost everything during a recession and never quite recovered. "One bad month," Caleb said, "and the world doesn't look at you the same." Tyler responded, "One moment, and you realize you've been looking at the world the wrong way." They both laughed quietly. No walls, just understanding. Back at the restaurant, Tyler's co-workers followed suit. Not because of pressure, but because something real had sparked. Rosa got a raise and began training others. The kitchen staff were invited to the front of the house during pre-shift meetings. Even customers noticed a different energy, less forced, more human. Tips increased, but more importantly, so did gratitude. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the skyline, casting amber light through the tall glass windows, a letter arrived at the restaurant. It was handwritten, elegant, sealed with a wax emblem. Gregory opened it and called everyone together. It was from John Reynolds. "To the staff of the Glass House, thank you for your hospitality during my visit. That day was not just a meal, it was a moment. To Tyler, growth often begins with discomfort. I saw yours, and I believe you will go far, not in title but in impact, with quiet respect, John Reynolds." The room fell silent, but this time, it wasn't the silence of shame. It was the silence of pride, of hearts swelling with purpose. The room fell silent, but this time, it wasn't the silence of shame. It was the silence of pride, of hearts swelling with purpose. Tyler folded the letter gently and kept it close, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of who he had been, who he was becoming, and the man who changed his life not with money or power, but with grace. Time, as it often does, moved forward, but the memory of that day at the Glass House never faded. It became a quiet legend among the staff, one rarely spoken about in full, but always felt in the air. The restaurant didn't frame John Reynolds' letter or hang it on a wall. That would have made it a spectacle. Instead, Gregory laminated a copy and tucked it inside the employee handbook, a silent reminder for new hires. Respect is the foundation of everything. For Tyler, life had entered a new chapter, not in wealth or fame, but in meaning. He hadn't left the restaurant, nor had he climbed some executive ladder. What he did do was become something rare, a person whose job had turned into a calling. He now trained all new servers, and the first story he told wasn't about how to sell the daily special. It was about that day, the day a man who looked homeless sat down, and how Tyler failed his first real test of character. "And what did I learn?" he would say to each group of new hires. "That you don't know who you're serving until you've chosen how to serve them. And if you only offer kindness to people who look like they can tip well, you've missed the entire point." The restaurant industry, brutal and fast-paced as it is, doesn't often give second chances, but the glass house had become an exception. Under Gregory's leadership, and, truthfully, under the echo of John Reynolds' presence, a culture of quiet dignity began to grow. Tips improved, but so did morale. Guests who walked through the doors noticed the difference. "There's something warm here," they would say. "Something real." Rosa, the once unnoticed dishwasher, was promoted to staff mentor. She now oversaw employee wellness and helped immigrant workers understand their rights and navigate life in the city. Her husband eventually found a steady job, and together they began saving for their first home. Every year, on the anniversary of Reynolds' visit, the restaurant closed for one evening. Not for repairs, not for inventory, but for reflection. Staff were invited to a quiet dinner together, where phones were left off, titles didn't matter, and stories were shared. And always someone would bring up Tyler's turning point. Not to mock, but to remember. It wasn't about his mistake. It was about his courage to transform. John Reynolds never returned, at least not publicly, but his influence was felt in subtle ways. Once, a single mother dined in, clearly exhausted and in worn clothing. She asked only for water and a bread basket. A new hostess hesitated, unsure if she should seat her at a prime window spot. Tyler saw the hesitation, nodded, and walked over himself. "Please," he said, guiding the woman gently. "This is one of our best seats. You deserve it." After her quiet meal, she asked for the bill, only to be told, "It's been taken care of. Someone wanted you to feel seen today." She left in tears, not from sadness, but from grace. Years passed, staff came and went, but the story of the man with the billionaire badge became a parable, not about riches, but about recognition. It reminded people that what we carry on the outside often masks the depths of what's within. Tyler eventually did move on, not out of restlessness, but evolution. He enrolled in community college, studied social psychology, and later earned a scholarship to complete a degree in nonprofit leadership. His dream wasn't to own a restaurant anymore. It was to open a program for young people in hospitality, one that taught service as a form of character, not just business. He founded the Second Look Project, an organization that helped train at-risk youth and formerly incarcerated individuals in the hospitality industry. Its core principle was simple. Everyone deserves a second look and a second chance. The first plaque in their training center bore no photo, no headline, just a quote. "Judging others doesn't reveal who they are. It reveals who you are." John Reynolds. One day, long after the incident, Tyler received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, only a small, elegant envelope with a crisp card inside. The note was handwritten in the same style he remembered. "Tyler, I heard what you built. I'm proud of you. Keep doing the work that matters. You've already proven that legacies are not about fortunes, but about how we make others feel." With silent applause, J.R. Tyler smiled, folded the letter, and placed it next to the original one in a small wooden box he kept on his desk. That box, to him, was worth more than gold. And so, the legacy continued, not in headlines, but in hearts, not in prestige, but in purpose. Because at the end of the day, no one remembered the price of the wine or the name of the dessert from that day at the glass house. But everyone remembered the man who was mocked, who said nothing and changed everything.